we have seen everything from discrepancies across specific months. And one example is one of our clients delegated some personal CFO services to us where we, kind of took over the QuickBooks for them. And after a few months of going through this process, we noticed one of their bills was much higher than previous months. And so that was a flag for us to say, well, what's the outlier here? And it happened to be a water bill. And we alerted the client to this, and they discovered that their pool was leaking.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Scale Smart, Grow Fast podcast. Most business owners are leaving money on the table, whether through overlooked expenses, inefficient processes, or financial blind spots. In this episode, Ali Swart, partner and managing director at Waldron Private Wealth, shares the top financial strategies entrepreneurs can use to tighten their budgets, improve profitability, and make smarter financial decisions. From reducing duplicate expenses to structuring finances for long-term wealth, Ali provides practical insights for scaling without unnecessary financial strain. Ali, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. How are you?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Harley. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Ali, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background that brought you to the point of helping people with their finances.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm a certified financial planner and I've been practicing for about 16 years. Our firm, Waldron Private Wealth, is a multifamily office that really caters to three types of folks. We cater to business owners, but they are usually folks that either have an operating company or have transacted an operating company. They are real estate owners or they are franchisees. Those are the main three types of business owners or entrepreneurs that we help. I would say that's probably 90% of our clientele. And then the other portion of our clientele are high income earning individuals who, might be in corporate America or C-suite folks, medical professionals, and then professional athletes. And ultimately, I got into this industry simply to help people. I know every financial planner probably says that. I grew up in a primarily single mother household. And when my parents were married, there was a lot of tension around their finances. So I had these early iterations of hearing my parents have some conflict around finances. And so it was instilled in me very early on that, wow, finances are important. I think even still to this day, finances are the number one stressor of Americans. And because I dealt with that firsthand, I simply started my career just wanting to help people. Like I said, if I could help one family alleviate some of the financial strains, concerns, arguments that I heard my parents have, that would be a pretty rewarding career. And so, I've been doing this for 16 years and ultimately have worked for a couple of different firms all along the wealth spectrum. And I've been Waldron Private Wealth for going on 8 years now.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that background. I'm sure it's really satisfying to see the work you're doing now, helping other people, not just preserve and grow their wealth, but it could have real impacts on their families and keeping families together.
It really does. And I know this particular thing about family dynamics and conflict and all of that, but that's a real part of what we do. Sometimes I feel like I'm more of like a therapist as opposed to a financial planner because there are a lot of family conversations around wealth, how it's created, how it's spent, how it's passed down. And the family communication around is very important. We work with a lot of multi-generational wealth families where it's very common to maybe have G1 who is maybe in their 70s or 80s, a G2 that's in their 50s or 60s, a G3 that's maybe in their 20s or 30s. In some cases, maybe even a G4 that is just entering into toddlerhood. And so all of those conversations around the wealth spectrum.
I love it. Well, people are in business for family. So I think talking about families is important too when it comes to finances and business. Now, you work closely with business owners and high net worth individuals. What are the most common financial blind spots people miss?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And one of the things that we really live by is as a multifamily office, we really take a deep and wide approach with our clients in understanding their total balance sheet. So I think when people think of financial planners, they might think of budgeting or retirement planning, maybe a little bit of cash flow, but we really look at the client's entire balance sheet, which would include all of their public holdings. In a lot of our business owner cases, they're private holdings because they're probably coming from a family-owned business or an inherited business, all the way to what risks do they have out there in terms of insurances and really looking at those things. And so when I think about blind spots, A lot of folks will come to us because they either don't have a team, they know that they need one. And when I say a financial team, it's usually comprised of at least two, three, four individuals, which is usually a wealth manager, usually a good attorney that specializes in either estate planning, or if they are business owners, they probably have a good business attorney, and then a really good accountant. At a minimum, our clients probably need those three things along with some other ancillary professionals in their suite. So people that come to us have the blind spot of either knowing they need those people and they don't have them yet, they haven't assembled their team, or they come to us with a team, but maybe the team is not talking appropriately, right? Nobody's communicating, nobody's quarterbacking. Things are getting missed because there's not open communication between the or amongst the professionals. And so we really pride ourselves on being able to take all of the professionals in our clients' lives, get them talking, get them on the same page, which ultimately leads to better financial outcomes and decisions.
Yeah, I can imagine that's super helpful. And if you're busy doing your business and managing your family, the last thing you want to do is try to quarterback all these other professionals that are seemingly just trying to sell you services and things you may need, but you just sometimes don't even know what's needed. So having someone like you be able to come in with your team and just manage all that seems like a no-brainer for people. With many entrepreneurs, I imagine, are coming into you and maybe have some issues with mixing their personal and business finances. What are the risks of this, and what steps can they take to help separate the two?
I think that's a great comment, because by having a family business or being maybe a startup in the very beginning, it's very common to intermix your personal expenses and your business expenses. And it's not anything malicious. It's just you're one person running personal finances and you're also a business owner running your business expenses. And so being able to separate those is really integral in being able to look at your P&L, both on your personal side and your business side. Because inevitably, if those things are intermixed, you're not going to have a true picture of the actual expenses that you're having on your personal side, which can inhibit the decision making for future investments, future cash flow, things like that. And then likewise on your business side, you're not able to exactly identify what resources your actual business needs, which makes it difficult to calculate the bottom line P&Ls for what the actual business is producing. And so when we see folks in that situation, we do work in a capacity to have that person sometimes delegate that bookkeeping to someone, whether it's a CPA, a bookkeeper, a VA. There are personal CFO services out there. But having somebody that can partner with you to really clean up the books and records and separate the personal and the business expenses is integral for being able to calculate the P&L stuff, but also be able to make investment decisions and cash flow decisions in each of those buckets.
Now, I'm big on technology and leveraging systems and people. Do you have any particular tools or systems that you see commonly being used or recommend for your clients, both on the business and maybe the personal side, for tracking, managing their finances?
Sure. So the most common one we see is QuickBooks. I'm definitely not a power user of QuickBooks, but more often than not, if somebody is coming to us and they have any system in place, from a technology standpoint, it's usually QuickBooks. My understanding is it's pretty easy to connect to, pretty easy to get up and running. It also depends on the industry too. We will see a lot of real estate investors that have more real estate specific platforms that they are using to help with that. But I would say by and large, from just a 1,000-foot view, is QuickBooks for sure.
Now, before we got on the podcast, you had mentioned that you've uncovered some cases where business owners were losing money without even realizing it, having duplicate payments or unnoticed discrepancies. How can business owners set up automated or outsourced systems to catch these mistakes early?
Yeah. So I think it's a couple of things, partnering with some sort of professional that is helping you with those things or delegating some of those things, having a second eye on those is just really important. And to your point, we have seen so many examples of where having a second set of eyes on those books and records is really important to uncover things that you didn't know were there. We have seen everything from discrepancies across specific months. And one example is one of our clients delegated some personal CFO services to us where we kind of took over the QuickBooks for them. And after a few months of going through this process, we noticed one of their bills was much higher than previous months. And so that was a flag for us to say, well, what's the outlier here? And it happened to be a water bill. And we alerted the client to this, and they discovered that their pool was leaking. And this was a property that they didn't live in. It was, a second home. And so they wouldn't have known it was there otherwise, so just being able to uncover some of those things. Another one is we will sometimes manage our clients' LLC payments. And so an LLC could be a rental property. It could be something with private aviation. It could be private watercraft, any of those things where you have some recurring expenses on there. And a lot of times with those things, if you're not watching the expenses, they can add up and you're unaware of how much they're actually costing. So we have been through situations where we have, partnered with our clients to manage some of those LLCs that have led them to make different decisions. So for example, we had a client who owned aircraft and was really unaware of the total cost it was doing each year to be able to have private aircraft. And so they ended up selling that aircraft and then entering into a fractional ownership of another aircraft with some business partners that he already had. So just being able to highlight those things that you were just kind of unaware of that led to different and better financial decision making it's a really cool thing to see.
As some great examples. I know myself personally, we've had issues with our rental properties and different bank accounts and loans of having like duplicate automatic payments going to certain accounts. And, thankfully our virtual assistant bookkeeper was able to flag that after just a couple months, was like, hey, this account's like growing faster than it should be. And we were able to get that corrected before it was a bigger issue. So that's a really important thing.
I think that's an excellent example. Like, duplicate payments, checks that don't clear. Maybe you deposit a check and something goes awry with the bank and it never actually credits to the account. Flat out missed payments. So you mentioned rental properties. If you have a plethora of rental properties, it's easy to miss a rental payment if you're not paying close attention. So all great examples.
Well, on the topic of like cash movement, cash flow is king, but many business owners struggle with financial clarity. What are some key reports or metrics that they should review regularly? And how can they leverage their team that they have to helping them track these things to really zero in on the most important items?
Yeah, so I think especially in the post-COVID era, it's become more important to understand some basics, right? I'm not going to have any like absolute gems here, but it comes back to the basics. You have to know what your revenue is. You have to know what your expenses are. You have to know what those profit margins are. I would argue it's not just knowing what your profit margins are, but having a target, knowing what your industry, and this is coming from the business owner standpoint of what is your industry standard for what profit margins should be? What should your revenue be? What should the expenses be? And then being able to align that and being able to make business decisions on if those metrics are off. And I mentioned the post-COVID era thing because it has become interesting for a lot of companies to be able to measure certain things on businesses that have employees, right? There's a lot of discussion and studies done on the profitability and productivity and efficiencies of in-person work versus remote work versus hybrid work versus carrying office space or not. What does that ultimately cost a company? And so I think, I'll just speak for an industry like ours with wealth management. We don't sell widgets, right? We don't sell a hard product. So our people that's our biggest cost. And right. So being able to quantify what your people are worth, what they're doing, what their productivity is, it's a really esoteric thing to try to understand. And something that our company actually put in place to try to understand that from a wealth management perspective is tracking hours. And we weren't doing it from an overarching, big brother type of feel. We're doing it from who are our profitable clients? Who are we spending a lot of time on? Does a $25 million client, how much more time do they take than a $10 million client? Like just being able to identify how much effort and time and productivity is going into a different client segment, I think is really important for any type of business owner. And that could translate across industries. If you are selling widgets or product, inevitably you're going to have different types of products, and those products are probably going to have different profit margins associated with them, which leads you to make adjustments within your business. A lot of going into this exercise for our company, we had to ask ourselves, what are we hoping to get out of this exercise? And at first it was just like, let's get the data and see what the data says. And then we can make strategic business decisions with that data. So that's only been going on at our company for about 6 or 8 months. But I myself am kind of a data geek. And with I run two different teams at our company, with our wealth planning team and then our high net worth team. So being able to understand the amount of employee calories that are going on to those clients is not only important from a business standpoint, but I think also in the post-COVID era, I think a lot of managers would be prudent to be able to measure, burnout. If see that a particular employee is putting in, 1.3 times the amount of hours of somebody else, it's like, okay, well, how do I manage that person's workload as well to be able to manage their capacity? So I think there's a lot of things that can come out of understanding what goes into a business to be able to help you make.
Every day, your top performers are buried under emails, scheduling, and reporting, work that doesn't move the needle. The result? Frustration, burnout, and worst of all, lost revenue. That's why we created the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers, a simple, battle-tested framework to eliminate busy work and unlock your team's full potential. Inside, you'll get the exact steps top executives use to retain A players, boost productivity, and free up their team for high-impact work. Stop losing revenue. Go to workergenics.com/growthhub or check the episode notes to download the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers now. Well, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that burnout and tracking the hours. It's not to be punitive of them, help them be more efficient. And there might be times where you have those examples of like, you're doing more hours than anybody else. There's great value there. How can we keep you from burning out? And maybe that's a time you bring in that like virtual assistant, get them the executive assistant to help take those low level tasks off their plate. So those hours are being done at, a lower cost so they can focus on the high value work for clients. That's in the time tracking too. That's something that we value a lot. Part of the services that we provide is a task management system built on Monday.com. And every single task has a built-in timer. And again, we train all of our employees to use it, not as like a punitive thing, being like, oh, why did you spend so long on this? It's so we know, and as business owners, where the time is being spent on what task. So then we can make high-level decisions of like, does this task need to still exist? Can we just cut it? How can we make it more efficient? What needs to happen if we 10x the business? Do we need to put more people in what place and handle what tasks? So I'm really glad you mentioned that time aspect of bookkeeping with finances, because it is just as important as the financial bookkeeping. Continuing on that line of the bookkeeping, it's often seen, as like a back office function. How can business owners turn that bookkeeping, whether it's the finance or the time spent with employees, kind of we talked about, into a strategic advantage rather than just like a compliance task?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, because I think managing books and records and doing the bookkeeping, sometimes it's pretty mundane. It's the sexiest part of doing a business. But like I said earlier, I'm a data geek, and it's not just for having the sake of data, it's being able to make strategic decisions about your business. And so whether that's on the business side or the personal side, being able to understand your business cash flow and your personal cash flow is simply a mechanism and a tool to be able to make disciplined decisions around where you want to go. I think most people go into each year with specific goals that they have set out, and certainly businesses go into each year with a goal set out. And if you're not measuring things, how are they going to get managed? And if they're not being managed, you're not going to be working towards those goals effectively.
Absolutely. A little earlier, you mentioned that you helped a client that was managing their aviation expenses, leading to a major decision to sell the aircraft and get into a partial ownership situation. Are there some other kind of big picture financial optimizations that you've seen that have saved business owners significant amount of money?
Yeah, I think that the taxation aspect of it is usually the thing that we look at immediately for some low hanging fruit. And that goes right back to the bookkeeping aspect of it, right? It's not necessarily bookkeeping, but it is books and records. It is filing taxes, and whether that is missing a deduction on a tax return, whether it's not filing something properly, whether it's unnecessary extensions that didn't need to happen. that is usually the biggest piece of low hanging fruit that if we actually have the opportunity to review a prospective client's tax return, that's where we're going to be able to add a ton of value. Being able to obtain a tax return for our clients is a standard practice. So we do that every year with our clients. But with anybody that is considering our services, being able to review those tax returns and get a look under the hood is to give us some really good data points on ways to optimize a financial situation.
So speaking of like kind of looking under the hood at the financial situations, I wanted to touch on like the account reconciliation. Many entrepreneurs don't reconcile their accounts regularly, and that might be something that leads to lost revenue. What are some simple financial habits that can support them in catching errors early and making it easier to reconcile accounts?
Yeah, so I definitely think that's where some automation can come in. We had one client who quite literally had not reconciled an account in several years, right? It just
Mm,
kind of was there and the transactions happen and it just became a non-priority, right? Nobody sets out to say, hey, I'm not going to look at this account for like 2 or 3 years, but it just kind of falls by the wayside. So I think to the extent where you can manage automation and set up certain flags for, hey, this is an outlier expense. Hey, you're building up too much cash. Hey, you're getting a low balance of cash. So that's a way that you can set some guardrails to give you a flag for, I need to go check into that. And even I myself have done that on the personal side with some of the more fintech apps. And you have to pay attention to some of the automatic settings because, so for example, I think one of the automatic settings was low, and we had just come back from vacation, and we did a massive Costco haul. Right, fridge is empty. You come home from vacation, you got nothing, and on Monday morning after everything reconciles from the weekend, I get this email that says you have a large expense, and at first my heart kind of sank. I'm like, what is this? Like I didn't spend outsized money this weekend, but I open it and it's like my Costco receipt. It's like,
mhm.
okay, well, maybe I should adjust those default settings because this email scared me, but it was much ado about
Yeah.
nothing. So just having those guardrails set on automation, I think is cool, but also important. And then to the extent, Harley, to your point of having a human, whether it's a VA, a personal CFO, bookkeeper, whoever goes through those periodically, minimum at a monthly basis. I mean, ideally it's weekly so you catch things quicker, but at minimum monthly basis to just review transactions and make sure things credit and settle properly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might get lulled into a false sense of security now that we do have so many things automated, and like QuickBooks can link to all your accounts and pull the transactions in automatically, and they just kind of assume that, well, we don't need to reconcile anymore because it's all automatic. But things can get out of whack pretty easily, and if you don't have that extra check at least on a monthly basis, like you said, could be some cash flow problems that happen.
Yeah, and I think categories is another big one. If you do have some automation, your system is probably flagging those for specific categories. And you can teach a system, right? Like you can go in and things and it picks up on category the next time. But those easily skew a perceived P&L if you have things that are automatically being categorized and you aren't scrutinizing the categories. Or if you're routinely making purchases somewhere that should really be split. And that's probably more on the personal side. So in my example of I went to Costco and you spend a bunch of money. Well, part of that is probably on personal stuff, but if you have a business, maybe you stocked up stuff for the business at Costco too. Like to what extent of that split transaction should be personal versus business versus groceries versus kids versus whatever else you've spent there. So being able to identify those split transactions, I can be meaningful too.
Love it. So I wanted to jump into like people that are scaling their businesses. And when you are getting to this point where you're scaling a business, it requires strong financial discipline. What are some proactive budgeting or cash flow strategies that you recommend people employ to help those business owners avoid financial strain as they grow and scale?
Yeah, so we're the big fan of being able to keep cash as a buffer. I think inevitably when you're growing and scaling, it's utilizing a buffer somehow, whether that's pure cash as a buffer, whether that is having available lines of credit or, revolving lines of debt that you can tap if you're needing them, because there certainly are smart uses of debt within your business, which I think every business owner knows. But when you're really scaling up, it's identifying What should be paid in cash? What should we finance? What makes the most sense? Are there tax levers that we should be pulling as we grow and scale? And then something that I think you have to pay attention to as you grow, especially in those periods of rapid growth, is that your metrics may change temporarily, right? So, I joined Waldron about 8 years ago and we were a 42-person company. We are now an 80-person company, 7, 8 years to the future. And we went through a period of rapid growth and rapid hiring, and we were kind of hiring ahead of a need. And when you're hiring ahead of a need, inevitably your metrics are going to shift a little bit, right? Your profit margins might be a little bit lower in those years where you're investing in your business. And you have to be able to understand that might not feel good for the year or two that you're investing and you're scaling and you're growing. But then you give yourself a year or two to catch up, to let those things marinate, implement, and then get ready for your next leg up. So, I think especially in business where to some extent our revenues are driven by the public, right? A portion of our revenue is tied to public markets. And so when you have a year like, 2022 and the markets are off 20%, inevitably your revenues are going to feel that a little bit, but maybe it doesn't full out change your decision making. It's just being aware.
Now, if a business owner wanted to improve their financial oversight tomorrow, what's one thing they should start doing immediately? And what would you recommend that be?
Yeah, so it would be a combination of making sure that you are delegating the bookkeeping responsibilities and truly knowing your numbers. And I would say a dual purpose of who you're partnering with to do that, they are able to have open lines of communication with you and be proactive about it. Because I think there is a difference of, Harley hires a VA to manage the books, and then he just gets a report that might sit on his desk for 6 months before he actually reviews it, versus Harley hiring a VA to do his bookkeeping and sitting down with that VA every month and the VA pointing out, I found these discrepancies. What do you think about this? Or what could have been attributed to this? So that open communication, it's not just having the data, but it's what you do with the data that can make a lot of difference.
Awesome. Ali, thank you so much for sharing these insights and strategies and tips with our audience today. If people want to learn more about your services and have a deeper conversation with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, we have a really robust website, waldronprivatewealth.com. So Waldron is WALDRON. We have a ton of resources on there that goes over all of our services, our team. You can sign up for our insights, which is our newsletter. And then we also have a podcast as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, for those of you listening, if you got value from this episode, do one quick thing for us. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future strategies to help you scale smarter. And do you know a business owner or a colleague who could use this? Share this episode with them. It could be exactly what they need right now. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, leave us a quick star rating. It helps us reach more leaders like you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.